All right. So we are here at Organic Valley in Lafarge, Wisconsin, at the headquarters with Guy Jodarski, and he's a staff veterinarian here, and he's willing to take the time to kind of let us pick his brain and talk some shop here. So, do you mind just starting off telling a little bit about yourself?
Not at all. Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I'm a veterinarian, and I've been in practice almost 30 years now. And I worked in conventional dairy practice most of when I had a clinic, and I was a partner in central Wisconsin with an area with a lot of dairy cattle. After that, I went and did some things in industry, and then I ended up with Organic Valley about 10 years ago. Started working part-time and worked into it as a contractor, and now I'm full-time with Organic Valley as an employee for about 5 years. And so Organic Valley is a cooperative of 1,800 farmers, about 35 states across the country. And so we do a lot of traveling, educating farmers on how to raise their animals healthy without using antibiotics, hormones, that sort of thing.
Very good. So are you actually treating, or are you just on the more education side?
At this point, I'm more in the educational mode, and so I do see farms in travels a little bit if they're having a herd issue, troubleshooting different challenges. But for the most part, I take a lot of phone calls with farmers that would have a situation and they would wonder how to treat, or they have a local veterinarian that's wondering what they can use and still stay organic. And so that's pretty much what it's more of a education, advising type of role now, rather than directly working on animals.
Sure.
Yeah.
So did you have an organic focus prior to coming on with Organic Valley?
Well, not to start with, because I was in a conventional practice for about 12 years, and so we pretty much used all the drugs and everything, worked with conventional farmers. I only knew of one organic farmer back in those days, but then over time, when I was doing some other things, I ended up working for a couple of companies that they supplied organic farmers. They made natural products and feed supplements, and so that I started to learn a lot more about it at that point. And I met some other people, and one really key person, Dr. Paul Detloff, who's from Arcadia, Wisconsin, and he's kind of a pioneer, and he kind of taught me a lot of this stuff, and ended up started working with him in Organic Valley, and so now here we are.
Wow.
So is that a big phase shift for you, kind of going from conventional more to organic?
In some ways, it's a different approach because, we do learn in vet school, we do learn about prevention, but really the focus is on treatment. And
Right.
So you're learning a lot of drugs, you're learning surgeries, you're learning all these ways to deal with the problem.
The
but
basic medical model.
Yeah. You're
Across
right.
the
You're
board,
right. Yeah,
you know?
You're right. It is a lot analogous to human health, very much so. Yeah, and so. But the organic approach is a lot more building the health into the system, and so getting the animals so that you really don't have to use a lot of this stuff. Now we do have alternatives that we can use, and we do use. So there are things like garlic, which is antibacterial. So when you have an infection, instead of using antibiotics, sometimes we use garlic. But we really like to rather get to the core of the issue, like if it's a respiratory problem, do we need to fix the ventilation? Do we need to vaccinate more? That sort of thing. So we really want to prevent the problems. And the guys that have been at it a while really don't have a lot of trouble with their animals.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest things that you talk about with the farmers when you're, going and educating? What are some of the bigger topics that you cover, and how to, keep their herd healthy? Or
Yeah, so really, we work with we do have an egg pool, we do have meat animals, but my main focus is dairy. The biggest portion of this cooperative is dairy, and so we work with dairy farmers a lot. And for them, it's the nutrition. Of course, for all animals, it's the nutrition. Even ourselves, the nutrition is huge.
Yeah.
And so the nutrition is a big one, and then for cattle, the grazing. The grazing itself is very health promoting. Doing the good job with that really. The exercise, the fresh air, the fresh feed, the lush feed, the green feed, all that stuff builds the health. And then the step that goes a little bit further is working on the soil, working on the mineral balance, the biology, the diversity, which is something you don't learn in vet school. You don't make that connection with the soil. That took a long time for me to get to that point. The first time I heard a vet talking about soil, I go, well, why is this vet talking about soil? But
Right.
in the end, it really is important because it's the foundation that makes the plants healthy, and then the plants are nutritionally better, and so then it makes the whole thing go. Yeah.
Very interesting. And that's kind of one of the bigger topics, I think, that correlates kind of to what we're talking about in terms of how it translates to human health. I mean, is that something you would agree with?
Certainly, yeah. Because it's the products of the animals are really a reflection of what they're eating, and so that's a reflection of what's growing on the farm. So that, yeah, it's all tied together.
I think one of my favorite quotes, I can't remember who said it, it's the saying of it, it's not, you're not what you eat, you are what you eat was the thing. It's like you are what you eats. And going down further down that line, and I know I've just gotten more into like looking at grass-fed sources for beef and things like that, like paying that little bit of extra for those different things as it currently is, but kind of the scary part of that of like the hormones that can go into a cow that make them bigger, well then in theory you're also ingesting that hormone, which it could be small, but is at the tipping point or that key lock that could be really putting on, a huge part onto a much bigger picture, but
yeah, there certainly are concerns about things like hormones and antibiotics, and antibiotic resistance is something that we're seeing in medicine so much that a lot of the antibiotics don't work well anymore because of such a widespread use. So that's definitely a big issue. But there's also, and we'll get into it more too, there's actually differences in the nutritional content. With grass-fed, there's actually different fat profiles, all this sort of things. Yeah.
I don't know if we want to dive into that.
Sure.
We were talking about that a little bit on the way up. I followed closely the guy Dave Asprey. He started his Bulletproof Nutrition. He's big grass-fed and fat. He started the whole butter in your coffee trend. I don't know if you had heard on that one a little bit. Drinking it currently. That's my new breakfast, but grass-fed butter, by the way. But he's a huge proponent of grass-fed this, grass-fed that. And we were just talking to another guy who's PhD, and he's out and he goes a whole different route, posted a study that he had seen that basically showed that there wasn't a huge difference between grass-fed and grain-fed in terms of nutritional profile. I tend to lean to there is better, and then even with going, and you could get into ketogenics and all that with the diets, but being able to ingest that fat from a grass-fed cow and not have to worry about it destroying your health and utilizing that as an energy source and not worrying about, like you said, the antibiotics or any of the hormones that get stored in that. So I don't know where I was going with all that, but nutritional content is, what you've seen in your own time or research.
So you've thrown out a big subject, and it's good, but it's good because the first part of that is fat itself. We've got to talk about fat because we've got in this country, United States, we've had for 50 years a phobia about fat, about animal fat in particular, and it's really misplaced because it's pushed us to the carbs. And as you know, that's how you really get fat. That's how you make animals fat. That's how you make people fat. Is give them sugar, give them starch, and insulin makes them put more fat in their body. So we know a lot more about it now. The animal fats and stuff. They're finding out that it is really important how the animals are raised, the fat profile. But in general, the whole problem of fat and cholesterol has been really overstated. It's been really overstated, and there were some early researchers that really. It goes all the way back to the 1950s, and there was this guy at Minnesota named Ansel Keys, and he had this hypothesis that the cholesterol and saturated fat were the big issue, and it got built into the system, and then the dietary guidelines came along where the government actually started making recommendations, and it just kind of became doctrine that saturated fat and cholesterol and animal fat was bad for you, which the bigger, newer studies are refuting all that. The human health studies are refuting that. And so we've learned that it's much more dangerous to eat margarine because of the trans fats than it is to eat good fat from butter and stuff. So as specifically about fats from animals, the one thing we should talk about a little bit is the omega fatty acids. So omega fatty acids are essential fatty acids, which means our body can't make them. We have to take them into the diet. And so there's omega-6 and omega-3 are classes. There's several different ones of each one, but they're the broad classes that the ones we talk about the most are the omega-6s, the omega-3. There are omega-9s, there are other ones out there, but the 6 and the 3 are the biggest part of the diet. And the body can convert them to the other ones that you need. So you need some of 6 and 3. And so we're going to talk about the 6 to 3 balance and all that. And we should keep in mind that it isn't that 6 is really bad in itself, because we need 6. We need omega-6. Because omega-3 kind of comes in as the hero here, you know, this is the good one.
Right.
But we need both. We do need omega-6, and actually, nutritionists, health professionals have kind of come to somewhat of a consensus that the human diet, the optimal fat ratio between 6 to 3 would be 2.5 to 3 parts of omega-6 for 1 part of omega-3. So we actually need a little more omega-6 than 2 to 3 times omega-6 as omega-3. But the problem is the American diet in the last 20, 30 years has become so based on processed food, so based on grain, corn and soy in particular. So those grains carry heavy loads of omega-6. So you put that together with recommendations to not eat animal fat, which is one of the big sources of omega-3, by the way. Omega-3 comes from fish. We always think about fish oil, and that is it's a super rich source. But the fact is, people eat more meat and dairy in their diet than they eat fish. And so the omega-3 contribution from meat and dairy are huge. It actually is bigger than fish because people eat less fish.
Right.
And so we've got to keep that in mind. So if we start taking, the diet, the old guidelines where we don't want to eat animal fat, now we're not taking in omega-3. We're eating these processed foods. Anything with corn in it is going to have omega-6. And a lot of the processed foods will use soybean oil as the oil base, and soybean oil is just loaded with omega-6. So what's happened is the human diet in the United States has gone to 20 or 30 or even more parts of omega-6 for 1 part of omega-3.
Yep.
And that's a problem.
Sure.
That's a problem, yeah. So omega-6...
This is all the stuff I've read.
So omega-6 is inflammatory. That's the other thing to think about. It's pro-inflammatory.
Yep.
So all these chronic diseases that we're dealing with, arthritis, diabetes, cancer to some extent, heart disease, they have an inflammation as a part of their way they get started. And so anything that's going to promote inflammation isn't good. So omega-6 is a problem in that case. Omega-3, on the other hand, shuts down inflammation. And so the more we can get towards that 2.5 to 3 to 1 ratio, the healthier we're going to be.
Dr. David Seaman talks about, big on nutrition, he talks about basically those are all the same condition. They're all inflammatory conditions. It all comes from the same place. It's just where it manifests itself, whether it's arthritis or Alzheimer's or diabetes, they're all stemming from the same.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I used to get Newsweek magazine, and they had it's been a few years now, but they had a cover story one time called "The Fires Within," and it was this little graphic of the little fires in the joints and in the heart and all these places. And you're right. It's the inflammation is a problem. Yeah, widespread. Yeah.
Very interesting. So then, when you talk about grass-fed versus grain-fed, I think you're going to come back to probably some studies that were done that showed that grass-fed is going to demonstrate a higher omega-3 profile.
Yeah, and let's go to that right now. And so
Perfect.
there's 3 studies, 3 general studies that we would like to talk about, and it's not just grass-fed. These were studies comparing organic to conventional. So there's a link because organic requires grazing, it requires pasture. But this was not directly a grass-fed versus non-grass-fed. So this is organic versus conventional is what we're talking about.
So corn could still be thrown into that.
There would be
grain-fed.
The truth is, on the meat side, most of the meat in this country has been coming out of feedlots, which is grain-fed.
Right.
Now this grass-fed movement is there are non-organic grass-fed out there. That's very popular in some ways. But
hard to do in Wisconsin?
What's that?
Is that hard to do in Wisconsin with our winters?
Yeah, well, you do have to feed forage in the wintertime, stored forage. So yeah. It is.
I would assume it was a problem, but
winter is a challenge
or a struggle.
Yeah.
I just would ask the
But
question.
we'll talk about the organic and conventional. So the first one came out at the end of 2013, and this was Washington State University did this study where they looked at milk. And specifically, they looked at Organic Valley milk. The reason being, Organic Valley doesn't really own much for processing plants. We have farmers around the country in regional pools that bring milk to a plant. And that plant will be running conventional milk, but it cleans all the way out overnight, and in the morning the first run is organic, and they have to be inspected for organic and all that. So these plants are running both organic and conventional milk. They run the organic first, and then they push the conventional in the line right behind the organic. And so once they're done filling organic cartons, then they start pushing organic, conventional. And actually, the first few cartons of conventional are organic milk that was in the pipeline. Yeah. But what they ended up doing there is they took the mixed milk. So this is milk coming off of several farms in a tanker, and they put it in what's called a silo, where they're going to make the milk and before they pasteurize it and bottle it and all that. And they took samples of the Organic Valley milk and the conventional milk running at the same plant. And this was a study that went for a year and a half. It was 18 months in 7 regions of the country, so it was all around the country. And what they looked at was the fat content and the fat profile of the milk, and it was almost 400 samples, 384 samples, so almost 200 conventional, 200 organic. And what they found was a statistically significant difference. And so what we've been talking about, this omega 6-3 ratio, the conventional milk was just under 6 to 1, so it was 5.8 to 1 of the omega 6 to omega 3. The Organic Valley milk running at the same plants was just under 2.3 to 1. It was 2.28. So, yeah, it's the ratio is definitely different. And so there's been in the dairy industry, there's been a long time. There's been kind of a push against the conventional that don't like organic marketing, saying the milk is different, and so they've had this slogan that's milk is milk. It's all milk. You can call it organic and whatever, but this first study was really scientific, solid proof, from a university that there is really a significant difference in the milk. Yeah.
Wow. Absolutely. Yeah. So would you say, comparing conventional, what about a non-organic, typically pasture-raised cows versus organic? So
and that could go either way. As far as it would be comparable, depending on what percent of grazing they do and how much grain supplementing they do. So our farmers do supplement some grain, although we have a class of milk that's called grass milk where they use no grain.
Wow.
In that case, that milk actually gets down to 1 to 1.
Wow.
Yeah, if you take all the grain out of the diet and you feed nothing but forage, we have several herds. We actually have a product that's called grass milk, and there's grass milk yogurt now, and it is made from cows that never get any grain.
Wow.
And it tastes amazing too.
It does. It does. Especially during the grazing season when they're getting the fresh grass. It makes a huge difference. The guys that work at not Cashton, but at Chaseburg, the butter plant, they in the spring when the cows start going out on pasture, they start eating grass, and of course grass has the chlorophyll, the pigment. It has like the carotenes. So like carrots are orange because of that. Well, that's a precursor to vitamin A, and the milk, the fat actually turns yellower.
Right.
And the guys churning the butter, they call up the production and quality guys, and they say the butter changed today because there's a day in the spring when enough cows get pasture milk in the thing that the butter looks different.
Very interesting.
It changes. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so we make something called a pasture butter, which is only made during the summer months. And then we test it and then we didn't talk about this, there's something called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. It's a healthy fat, it's an anti-cancer fat, anti-inflammatory. That in that Washington State study, there was an 18% difference. The organic was 18% higher than the conventional. But in the summertime, it's higher yet. That study was a year-round study.
I need to stock up when that comes out in the summer.
Yeah,
because Sam's going to stop selling
and
like
the taste,
Kerrygold butter.
Yeah, the taste is amazing too.
Right.
The taste, it's darker color. It's but we quality control that butter by looking at CLA levels, actually making sure they meet the specs.
Do you see that in the fat of the cows too, grass-fed versus grain-fed?
Oh,
I've heard
certainly.
Like you get that more yellowish color to a grass-fed versus the white marbling of your typical.
Yeah, and especially certain breeds will have more of the color. The Jerseys, they're higher fat content milk, and if you did get meat from that animal, there'd be a yellowish fat naturally. Yeah. So you
I noticed that I purchased part of a quarter cow with somebody, and just noticed that with at least in the steaks, you could see the fat was a different color than if you were to just go your
Yep.
local supermarket and grab a.
And Americans have gotten used to, when you talk steak or whatever, they're used to a feedlot steak. So grass-fed beef is different. Even though it can be finished with fat, it's not usually quite as fatty.
Mhm.
It's a more mature animal. It takes longer to grow that animal because it's not getting the grain. So the cooking has to be different. It has to be cooked more slowly. It's not, the real fatty feedlot ones, they can be cooked pretty fast, and people are used to that. It's almost a softer texture, and so a lot of people associate that with like that beef taste, but that's really not healthy for you, as something that's grass fed with a little less fat. You have to cook it a little different, but actually you'll get more flavor in the meat itself.
Somebody asked me that the other day that we got talking about it, and they're like, what percent lean do you buy? And I honestly couldn't answer it because going just to the co-op
Right.
In La Crosse,
Right.
that's where I buy a lot of my meat. I don't even know if they list it. Like I don't look for it.
We
on their
have
ground.
Organic Prairie does our meat side for the co-op, and the biggest part of that is actually cull dairy cows go into meat, mostly hamburger and ground beef, and the ground beef that we package comes out and it's actually labeled. It's either 80-20 or 90-10.
Okay.
And so you can get it with 10% fat or 20% fat. So either way you can get it. And I would say that when you look at ground beef at the store, when you look at price and you look at how red it is, the fat content, it probably goes way over 20% fat in some cases. The cheaper ground chuck or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I noticed the immediate difference in taste and enjoyed it so much more. I just thought I didn't have to flavor anything else I put on.
Yeah.
Like I just cook it up on slow, low heat till it cooks enough, and then I don't put anything else on it, and it just tastes awesome.
Yeah, you get, and that's part of the animal maturing, eating pasture, longer period of time. You get the flavor profile is a lot more in the meat. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we didn't finish the studies. We got off on a sidetrack. But there were and the next two are actually the 2 or 3 how you count it. It's this university in England called Newcastle University.
Okay.
And Newcastle has done several. Now they've done like 3 of these what they call meta-analysis. And what a meta-study or meta-analysis is where you go to the literature, usually medical literature, and you look at studies on one topic that were all done. There's multiple studies, and as you know, especially on nutrition studies, there's conflicting studies all the time. There's one says this, one says that.
Isn't that the beauty
and people get frustrated because they follow advice for a while, and then it's like, oh, it changes, and it's like, well, make up your mind. And so what these meta-analyses attempt to do is take dozens of studies and then look for trends across all the studies. So there's a lot more power, there's a lot more data in these studies. And so the first one was done in 2014, and this was really about the produce, the organic produce. And so what they found, and this was 343 studies, and what they found, the antioxidants, we've been talking some about the pigments. We talked a little bit about carotene and stuff, but like the anthocyanins, the thing that makes a beet purple, lycopene, the tomato, there's flavonoids is a general class they're called. There's 20 to 40% higher in organic food. So you have more of these vitamin compounds in the food, these antioxidants, and oxidation is another process like inflammation that over time really takes a toll on the body. That's what ages cells, kills cells, is oxidation a lot of times too. And what it is, we need oxygen, but what happens is we get these really reactive species of oxygen like peroxide and things that are actually generated in tissue. And so antioxidants neutralize that. Our body has defense mechanisms. We have enzymes that deactivate those, but those enzymes need things like these antioxidants to recharge the enzyme. And so that's really important that we have these antioxidants in our diet. So they were higher. And then the other real 2 things they found was the pesticides were much lower. There were 4 times the amount of pesticides in the conventional. And there's been several studies where they took children and fed them an organic diet, fed them a conventional diet, fruits and vegetables, and looked at their urine for pesticides. And this has been repeated several times. And when they're on the conventional food, they've got pesticides in the urine, they go to the organic food, it goes right down, they switch the groups, it goes the other way. And so this has been done several times. So, yeah, you think about it, yeah, you know, you don't have to talk about it a whole lot.
No, it freaks you out. God, it
No
scares
wonder
the
why
crap out of
the
you.
cancer rates and
Yeah.
everything you look at.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah.
So why do you think the difference in the like the flavonoids and all that? Why do you think the difference between conventional and organic?
Yeah, it's a good question, and so I don't really know, but I would just, again, go back to the way things are grown. You know, not using pesticides for one thing, but also no synthetic fertilizers. So we've got to use compost, we've got to use natural sources of fertility, and so those things, and probably the plants probably grow slower, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that they do, I don't know for sure, but, you know,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Interesting.
I was just watching the little thing outside in the lobby before we came in. It had said something that these farmers were treating it as, you know, it's art and science to do a farm, but they didn't want to do a chemistry experiment.
Right.
And I think that is just so huge, and I've had this discussion, we actually talked about it, we haven't posted it yet, but like, going beyond that, just like all the chemistry that you run into each day, and you have no idea really that you're doing it when it comes to your shampoo and your soap and things like that, and just
It's a great
going
point.
to that, it's just insane that you have
Deodorant.
probably most,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
being
You know,
used
aluminum,
that way.
you're putting aluminum on your skin. Aluminum's been associated with Alzheimer's, you know,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's just, to me, it's scary, like that, it just so blindly for so many years, and it took me till probably the last year or two to kind of be like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
and I'm not perfect by any means, but like some of it's just like, good God, like what are we doing to ourselves, and you just don't even think about
And
it.
it's no wonder we have cancer centers in just
Right.
even small sized towns, the hospitals have a cancer center. You know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Just how much, and
Yeah.
I think that'll be a really interesting thing if it's even something to study, like with over people. Like how much can that change or go down if we
Right.
are addressing these seemingly little things? Like who would think putting your deodorant on once a day
Right.
could potentially be a reason that you're
Right.
gonna have memory problems and things
Right.
like that when
Right.
you're 80
Right.
years old.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, even a lot of the cosmetics and things like that.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean, there's phthalates, there's the preservatives in there. You know, there's all these things that are just not good for you.
Stuff that I can say, but I have no idea what it is.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
To the layperson.
Yeah.
They don't think about putting it on either. They just don't think
No,
twice. It's just
we
the
don't.
norm.
But you know, you kind of mentioned that it's scary, and it can be a little bit. But I think it's just becoming aware more.
Right.
And yeah, we don't need to be scared. I mean, it's a little disturbing, and when we think about you know, things being contaminated and all that, and there's really no pristine place, and that's all kind of depressing thinking. But you know, we have defense mechanisms. Our body has
True.
defense mechanisms. Nature has defense mechanisms, and so if we stop doing some of this stuff, it'll get detoxified,
Sure.
and both in our bodies and on the land. And so if we just stop putting this stuff out there, you know, nature will take care of it. And so that's the hopeful sign, I think.
Yeah, that is a great, optimistic. way.
Yeah. So just to finish up the studies, there was actually the third finding in that first Newcastle study was that cadmium is a heavy metal that's also not good for you, 48% less in organic. So that was pretty much a produce type thing. Then in 2016, Newcastle came out with two, actually you could call it one or two. They looked at 196 studies that were comparing milk between organic and conventional, and they looked at 67 studies comparing meat, organic and conventional. And these studies, of course, it's 2016, it's a few years after the other one, so it's a little bit later in time. There's some newer studies with bigger numbers and things like that. And what they found was omega-3 was up 50% on average for both meat and milk in organic. So you get 50% more omega-3. You get less omega-6, 18% less omega-6 in the meat. The milk was 46% higher in omega-3, so that's 50. We just said 50. Some of these, CLA, 34%, so it was actually up. It was the CLA was actually more than what we saw in the Washington State study. So, just a lot of good things.
Yeah,
A lot of
absolutely.
good things, yeah.
So how sustainable is it to, I mean, you think about like the big farms and, you know, your conventional crops and the livestock, all that. How sustainable is it for just feeding our country, or even world for that matter, but country just on a whole?
Yeah.
And that's another thing we talked about, just looking at, I mean, there is a large amount of waste with a lot of food products. And it's a huge, this is a huge can of worms, I feel like, too, because there's so much money in the big farming industries and behind the scenes, I think. But how sustainable do you think it is for us to feed everybody organically?
Yeah, so there's two parts to what we're talking about here that you've raised. The one is the issue of sustainability, and the other one is the feed the world. Okay, and so we live in the world of the soundbite these day and age, and so feed the world is one of the sound bites that's used against organic. That the idea that if everybody went organic, we'd starve because there's not enough food, and we gotta have the GMOs, we've got to have the sprays,
Right.
or we're not going to be able to feed these billions of people. Well, I think you talked a little bit about the waste, so let's go right at the feed the world thing. Right now, the world makes twice as much food as it needs. You know, we need 2,000 calories per person per day. We're making 4,000. So what happens to that? A lot of it gets thrown away. A lot of it doesn't get to people. So wherever there's hunger, wherever there's starvation, it's usually a distribution problem. Where, you know, and it's sadly this is markets and money that are moving things around. And there's an economist that actually got a Nobel Prize talking about the famines and how it's really not that there's a shortage of food, it's a shortage of distribution. And one of the things he pointed out during the Irish potato famine, during the height of that famine that drove all these people to this country, when people were starving in the countryside, there were ships going down the river to London loaded with butter, loaded with meat, loaded with produce. And so it was the money was pulling the food that was there out of the system, and yeah, people were starving, but it's not so much that the world is running out of food. It's the way we distribute it is part of that issue, okay? Then the question is organic really that much less productive? And in the short term, it sometimes is. When people switch from a conventional to organic model, they have to rethink the way they problem solve, they have to get their fertility up, they have to do different things. And so in the short run, sometimes the yields aren't as big, either with produce crops or with animals, with milk and things like that. What we find though is as people get their systems going, get up to speed, they actually can produce just as much. And there's a place called the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. And Rodale has done a 30-year called the Farming Systems Trial. And what they've done, now it's over 30 years. They published this a few years ago, it was 30, now it's probably 33, 34. But this Rodale farm has strips of ground that are alternating on the same farm. One's conventional, one's organic. And it goes all the way across this farm. And they've been doing this for 30 years. And they've been looking at crop yields and stuff, and what they've found is crop yields are the same. They're over the average, they're the same. What they find is that there's way less fossil fuel used on the organic side. Okay, so they look at the carbon footprint of the food, and there's actually less fossil fuel. And what they found is really interesting, during the dry years, the organic outproduces the conventional, because during the dry years, that organic soil has more organic matter. The carbon actually holds more moisture. The little bit of rain they do get in a dry year, the plants do better. And so in a dry year, the organic out yields, even the supposedly drought tolerant crops the GMOs are trying to put out there, the organic out yields it because the soil is better.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is kind of a myth, the feed the world thing. It's if you're opposed to organic, it's kind of easy to pop that out there and think you really got something. But you know, for one thing, we're not running out of food. We do have hungry people, and it's not because we don't have enough food. It's not getting to them. You know, the other thing is we can grow food organically. Now, it's not going to change overnight. You know, we're still a small part. You know, we're in that 5 to 10% range now, which is really huge, because we were looking at 1% or less than 1%.
Right.
When we got to 1%, people were like, well, yeah, you know, okay, you're 1%. Well, now we're in that 5 to 10% range, depending on what crop you look at and things.
Definitely.
But it's still, you go across, you know, the Corn Belt, and you look at the thousands and millions of acres of, corn and soybeans. And I think one of you
Year
talked
after
a little
year,
bit
too.
about how there's programs and stuff. So some of the thing about government getting involved is politically, it's better to have cheap food. And so we have all these programs that promote overgrowing some crops, and it distorts everything. Markets are okay by themselves, but when
Right.
you start putting, subsidies and things, you really distort the picture.
Yeah, makes it complicated. So it's growing, so what do you foresee in the future? I mean, is that trend gonna continue? At what point, is it gonna keep going, or is it
We
gonna-
certainly think so. We
Yeah.
certainly, we see leveling offs at different times, during the big recession, 2009, we got a
Yeah.
leveling off. It was really amazing because a lot of businesses were down that year, 50, 60, 70% different businesses. Our sales were off 1%.
Wow.
So the people that are buying organic are loyal,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
But there's this growth which goes a little bit in spurts. Right now, we're in a flat phase.
Okay.
We're not growing right now that much, but we really see long-term, the trend is up, up, up. It just keeps going up, and I think people are learning more about food, they're learning, and one of the arguments against organic is it costs too much, it costs too much. Well, what does healthcare cost you?
Oh my God.
That's a hard argument.
We could do a whole other episode of that.
And there is a link, there is a
Yeah.
link.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've talked, there's
Health insurance.
there's gonna have to be a shift
Oh, yeah,
in the healthcare system at
Oh,
some
yeah.
point. And
Yeah.
I know a couple of guys that we both follow, really, really smart guys, and they're like, whoever can get it figured out to get on the other side of when that thing starts going and be the first one in, they're gonna do really well for themselves in terms of looking at like you talked about, a preventative model.
right,
But
right.
that was kind of tying into that. The growth of it, is that something like Organic Valley, or just do they help with farmers that are interested in it, that are kind of on the fence of like knowing that they're gonna probably have to decrease their yields, which is gonna put stress on them and their family and everything like that, those first years. Is that the biggest?
Certainly,
roadblock
we
that
have a
you see?
lot of staff in the field that work directly with farmers,
Mhm.
recruiting farmers to become organic. And really, what sometimes drives farmers to look at organic are economics, of course. And
Right.
so right now, the conventional milk price is quite low. It had been pretty high for, several years. And so a lot of the conventional guys were happy where they were at. Now, with the lower conventional price, the organic price has stayed high. Now, a lot of people want to convert to organic. But we have enough right now. We're bringing on 300 farms in the next year or so.
Wow.
And so we have new farmers coming on all the time. And we support them, we educate them,
Yep.
we talk about what alternatives, what they need to treat with, how they can prevent diseases, and they can learn from our other farmers, and so it's a constant learning process, yeah.
Because it's expensive, from what I've seen in a couple different documentaries, to get officially certified.
Yeah.
It's not an easy process.
Well, the
to
land
get
is
your
the
official-
land is 3 years with no prohibited materials,
Mhm.
and then a dairy farm can do a 1-year transition with their cattle, but they would have to
Okay.
feed organic feed for a year and sell conventional milk. So that's a huge hurdle. That's especially when the milk price is low. So
Right.
we do actually supplement. We actually do pay a little bit of a
Okay.
extra to those farmers that are transitioning. So we actually pay them to. It's not enough to cover it, but it helps.
It helps ease the pain.
It helps
at least
ease the
of it.
pain,
That's
exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you do for the health? I know that's
Yeah.
one question that we had for
Yeah.
the animal health in terms of, there's not antibiotics. Is
Right.
that correct? Like, my understanding is if there's an organic cow and you're doing these methods that you try to prevent it without, if it has to be to that point to save the animal or something for antibiotics, that cow has to then go into the conventional market. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the United States, the National Organic Program, the NOP, is what they set the rules. And so the US NLP has chosen that it's a no antibiotic, and it doesn't mean you don't ever use antibiotics. Like you said, Kyle, if the cow is really sick and she's not responding to the natural treatment, so we have garlic, we have different plants that are, it's funny, a lot of the herbs are antibacterial, oregano, thyme, all these things, they have essential oils in them. Essential oils turn out to be antibacterial. So a lot of our natural herbal products are antibacterials. What's different about them, and I'm kind of digressing here, but they do have mixtures of compounds, and so it's not like an antibiotic is one single compound. So a bacteria can mutate and overcome that one compound easy, but if it's got 20 or 30, garlic has over 30 different antibacterials.
Wow.
So no bacteria can figure out how to do 30 changes at once. So the resistance doesn't go up with these herbal things. But you're right. If that didn't work, the farmer can't say, no, I'm not going to treat it with antibiotics I don't want to and let it die. If it really needs it, and this is a very small, doesn't happen very often, but I'll even advise in a really tough case sometimes that they use antibiotics. That animal is marked, and when the antibiotics are out of it, it's sold to conventional market. It's gone. It's not organic anymore. In Canada and Europe, the organic programs do allow antibiotics with extended withdrawal times. So you hold the animal for a real long time, the antibiotics beyond what conventional would do, and then you can still keep it organic. That's not in the U.S. So some people looking at U.S. organic say, well, you guys are too tough. That's really not reasonable because we're going to lose animals and so forth. Well, that's what Dr. Paul and I spend a lot of time teaching people that that's not true. There are alternatives you can use. You're not going to lose a lot of animals. And so I really think it's a good thing that the National Organic, the U.S. program, did draw this line in the sand, and especially where this whole discussion is going now with antibiotics and bacterial resistance. And, antibiotics aren't evil.
Nope.
I had Lyme disease one time, and I took the doxycycline for a month, and man, I'm glad I did. It just came right around, So when you need them, it's nice to have them work. So we're not saying antibiotics are evil. It's just the overuse of them, And yeah.
I worked with a doc one time. He had strep throat. Everybody throwing an antibiotic, and he firmly believed that it didn't actually do anything. Strep throat was not of antibiotic necessity, but it just made people feel better, so they were always throwing people on it. And that's the kind of stuff that it's like,
yeah.
Why?
Yeah, and a lot of it's the strep is a bacteria, so there's a little rationale there, but there's a lot of people that go in with sniffles, and it's a viral, it's a virus, and the antibiotics aren't doing anything for the virus, the immune system's got to take care of that, so.
And I've had the unfortunate for the kids that have had it, they go and all of a sudden they get C. difficile. Well, they had been on, for sinus infections and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Basically taking antibiotics like they were a multivitamin, and it caught up to them, and then it's just kind of like, now you're in trouble a little bit, like.
Well, you certainly upset your normal flora, and I think we're learning more and more about the importance of the bacteria that are in us and on us, and I think there's some really fascinating things we're learning about. That we actually, the bacterial by cell number is 10 to 100 times what our body cells are. We have that many bacteria in us and on us.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah. And so it's really about, and if you're on a real strong antibiotic, you're going to wipe out some of your gut flora, and that's going to, your gut is really important for health, and so that's a big issue.
Off of that, I got a kind of a random question. Just
as
we talk about different things, like probiotics and prebiotics.
Yeah.
Are they've always been around and kind of a hot topic for people.
Yep.
Is that something that you guys ever look at?
We use a lot. We love them. And they are allowed.
In terms of like supplementation for the animal or anything like that?
Yeah, whenever they're slow on eating, whatever, we like probiotics. That helps a lot. In raising calves, a lot of times probiotics are really helpful. We, yogurt's good, but what's even better is kefir. And so we do a lot of kefir. I do kefir at home. I'm a big believer in it. It's like yogurt with yeast in it, and so you've got these grains and you ferment the milk, and I think that's a really, really a neat thing. And we have people that raise calves on kefir, and they do tremendously. They actually, it's one of the things when people start doing it, they go, wow, I wish I would have done this a long time ago.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Is that something? Any supplementation? Like, is that like does that exist in the world of like veterinarian as like it has?
Probiotics are,
to a degree?
Probiotics are, and I actually, when I was first started practice, I learned this lesson early on because we would get what they call calf scours, where young calves have diarrhea, and they at that time the treatments. So I started in 1987. The treatments were tetracycline and sulfa pills. So you had these pills in little jars, and you would give them to a farmer and say, give the calf, a couple of these pills twice a day or whatever. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Then there was a product that came out, it was a probiotic, it was the first one that I remember, called Probios, and it was a powder. And we had started using that, and I started dispensing that to farmers, say, with calf scar problems, say, hey, add this to the milk. And guys that had consistently had a lot of problems, they just put it in as kind of a preventative, and the results were way better than the antibiotics.
Interesting.
So sometimes it's better to promote the good guys and try to kill the bad guys.
For sure.
Yeah.
Prevention.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what, going back to the soil,
Yes.
what are some measures that are taken to improve the quality of the soil as opposed, organic versus conventional?
Yep.
Because I know fertilizers are huge, and especially like with certain crops, like
Yeah.
I don't know, around like in this area, there's a lot of apple orchards, and they just get dumped with chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides and all that. So
Yeah.
what are some
Yeah.
things that are done organically besides maybe just like
Yeah,
peppers?
before we get into the specifics, let's talk a little bit about soil, because soil, I think the concept, is something we have to change in our mind, how we think about soil, because we think about soil a lot of times as dirt, and we think of it as kind of an inert, a place where plant roots grow, you buy bags of soil, this sort of thing. But soil really is a living, breathing community. It's full of life. It's full of, we've been talking about microorganisms. Well, there's just unbelievable amounts of microorganisms, but there's insects, there's invertebrates, there's worms, there's a lot of biology in soil. So I think we have to step back and think about the soil as being an ecosystem, a community, whatever term you want to use. It's way more complex, it's way more alive than what we thought about in the past. And so that, kind of feeds into what you do to the soil. And if you're thinking the soil is inert, and give it to the plant scientists, the agronomic people, they have figured out how to grow a lot of corn and a lot of soybean, but they know what chemicals to put on to feed that plant. Now, nutritionally, what is the plant really that good for you? But we do know the soil is different. The soil doesn't have the amount of organic matter. Okay, so organic matter is a big thing. That's the decay of the living parts, and that has these things called humic acids or humates in it, and those are the real breakdown products. It's the stuff that makes your topsoil that's nice and black, and stuff that makes it dark. Okay, and that is it binds things. It binds toxins. It also holds trace minerals and things like that. It's a real important part, but it holds water. And so having more organic matter, more humus, you hold more water. And we have these torrential rains. The last couple of days, we've had these big rains. We've had a wet summer. I was just out on the West Fork of the Kickapoo yesterday with a guy in a kayak, and the thing's running brown. And you look at, natural areas where there's vegetation, 4, 5, 6 feet tall. Why is that river running brown? It shouldn't be running brown. Yeah, we had 2-3 inches of rain, whatever, overnight. We had a lot of rain, but there's a lot of dirt coming off of cornfields, I would guess, corn and soybean fields, because there's a lot of dirt between the plants, and it's washing into the river, and that is a big problem. That's a big problem. So how do you measure the soil health? We do look at nutrients that are there. We look at minerals. The organic farmers tend to look at calcium a lot more seriously than the conventional would look at that, and we call it NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the big three that people are supplementing synthetically, and that's what they look at. We dive a little deeper into calcium, because we find that that's important, bringing trace minerals in and things like that. And so we would look at some of those other minerals. Sulfur is very important for protein quality. There's a lot of different things that we look at. We look at the organic matter. There are biological tests, but they're hard to do. There are some things there's one that looks at how much bacterial activity there is. That's a little quicker test, but there have been labs that actually take a soil sample and look at how much different critters are in there and stuff, and that's a very expensive test. And so there's a lot of different ways to measure it, but it's one of these things where you can see it when it's going the right way. You can feel it. The soil gets crumbly. It gets like cottage cheese. Go to a conventional cornfield sometime. When you're going down the road this time of year, there's all this big corn. Step out of your car and just walk into that field and look. And it's real interesting because, and the thing is, well, of course it's shaded. The corn is planted so close together, it's hard to get between. But go in there and look and see what that ground looks like, and it's about as hard as this table. Okay, it's just rock hard, and there's no weeds. Very little weeds because all the pesticides, the herbicides that are used, and so it's corn and that can withstand the herbicides, and there's very little life there. You go into an organic field, and especially a pasture, you can't hardly find the dirt because there's so much plants. There's so many plants, together.
Mm-hmm.
The soil has a whole different structure. It has a different feel when you walk on it. There's worms when it rains. All those things.
So I've got weeds growing in my garden.
Yeah.
That's a decent thing, and I shouldn't be so upset.
Well, it's a matter of degree. So weeds are, it's like what's the definition of a weed? So
Wow, that's true. If I've got things that I didn't plant that are growing in there, something's going okay.
Yeah, so dairy farmers only a definition of weed is something a cow won't eat. But yeah, some things have to be controlled, but the weeds actually have a purpose because they all have different root structures, and they reach down and grab minerals and things. Now there's some real noxious weeds that we definitely want to control, the giant ragweed and stuff like that.
Okay.
We don't want to let it go to seed and get out of control because or mustards and things like that, they take over,
Mm-hmm.
But weeds in general, we don't focus on the weeds as much. It's kind of that thing where we talked about the bacteria.
Yeah.
You cultivate there, you promote the good guys and don't worry about killing the bad guys. That's kind of the organic approach.
Interesting.
And the good stuff crowds out the bad stuff.
I saw online that you've got a talk where you do about biodiversity and how important that is, and I thought that was interesting.
It's huge. It's huge, and I think every day we're seeing that's being more and more important. And I think that's a really thought about, underappreciated thing is biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at the Corn Belt and we look at states across state, and I took a trip to Ohio a few weeks ago, and going across Illinois and Indiana, all this what we call monoculture, one plant, for millions and millions of acres, that is no diversity. And you don't see the birds, you don't see the insects, you don't see any of the other life. The whole ecosystem needs diversity. So it starts with the soil, having a lot of different things in the soil, but then a lot of different plants help too. We really like pastures with dozens and dozens of plants, and so cows have an ability to select plants that are medicinal. And that seems kind of crazy, but this goes way back to the 1800s. There's a guy in the UK that he would make these pastures called herbal lays, Ley, and that would just mean a very diverse pasture with a lot of these some so-called weeds, but some of them are like plantain and chicory and all these different plants, and again they have different minerals in them, but they also have different alkaloids and things. They have medicinal properties. Some of them are anti-parasitic, they kill worms and stuff. And what he found is if you had this really diverse lay, this little paddock, that if you had a sick cow, you just let her go in there and she kind of self-medicates. She roots around and finds the plants that she needs and she eats them. And so we like to offer diversity and let our animals select rather than mixing up a feed. I don't know if you ever saw this study. Did you ever see the study of this woman that back during the Depression, she did a study in Chicago. She was a Canadian nutrition. She was a doctor. She was really, being a woman, a doctor at that time, but she was a pediatrician, and she did a nutritional study in an orphanage in Chicago, where they took these orphans, and they were babies, they were infants, and as soon as they started eating solid food, rather than feed them the normal diet or whatever, she just offered a smorgasbord of different foods. Mm-hmm. And these kids would eat. It's very controversial in the dietitian world right now, whether this was really, good study or not.
Right.
But it was really fascinating because kids that had deficiencies that needed something, they would key on that food. And she just offered all these different foods, and they ate an amazingly balanced diet when they offered all this food. And
just on their own doing
Just on their own. So I think that goes back to us. And your body tells you what is good, and when you take it in, and you have a craving for things and stuff, and I think we need to pay attention to that.
Sure, just being able to listen
and knowing how you feel afterwards.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a key.
I know when I eat clean or better, what I would consider eating a better day, everything just runs smoother. I feel better, my body functions better, and then when I have my day where I'm in a hurry, so it's grabbing something, I know it's not as good. Yesterday was a perfect example. I was done by 9:30. I wanted to go to bed. I wanted nothing else to do with that day. But if I had
or you eat that fast food and an hour later you go, why did I do that?
It's the 2 o'clock crash. If I eat a good lunch, I don't have that 2 o'clock where I'm just like, oh my God, what's going on? You just power through it because your body's not having to deal with all of it.
I think what interferes with our body being able to sense and go with that is we've the food industry has put so much sugar, salt, and some fats in the food that people have gotten used to those flavors that overpower everything. And so that kind of masks your discrimination with your body really picking good foods. If you're really used to sugar and salt and certain fats, that's where the junk food just has that certain, appeal. But you're right. What does the body say an hour, 2-3 hours later? What does it say? What did you do to me? Yeah, right.
The sweet and salty mix, they
Yeah.
got you. They know how to get you.
They make a lot of money on
Yes,
those
they
mixes.
do.
Right. So did we cover the soil pretty much?
Yeah,
with
I
you
think
two?
that's
Okay.
good. I mean,
Okay.
you kind of hit on too how important that translates into the table, the plate.
Yeah.
What we get.
Yep. And diversity, I don't want to let that one go either, because it's not just the plants, it's also, a lot of our herds have crossbreed cattle, so there's a lot of different diversity in the cattle. I really like a farm that has diverse enterprises, where it actually has some chickens and hogs and some crops and some cattle. And, the old farms, 50, 100 years ago, were very diverse. And so we're kind of a nation of specialists now. We all got to specialize in all little tiny little areas, And I think that diversity all through, organizations, the diversity of people. You have this co-op is a diversity of farmers. We have, people very conservative, very, whatever, progressive, whatever you want to call it. We have Amish. We have.
It's good to have those different mixes, though. And
it's healthy.
inputs. Yeah.
It's healthy when you have that diversity. It's healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in nature, that's what gives it resilience. That's what gives it disease resistance. You don't see, a bunch of starlings coming in to a prairie. They go to a big cornfield. They go to a monoculture. When you see these things in nature, when they just get way out of hand, it's, these in forestry, this spruce budworm. Well, you got monocultures of spruce trees that go on for millions of acres. What do you expect? Some bug's going to figure it out, and it's just going to go to town,
Yeah.
And you go into some of these pine plantations, and you don't hear any birds. I don't know if you've ever been to like these even in Wisconsin, where they grow red pines in a sandy area, and these pines will get a tall canopy, and then they let their needles down, and so there'll be a duff of needles 6 inches thick, so nothing grows on the ground. There's these big pine trees. You don't hear a bird, you don't hear anything, so there's no diversity. Diversity in everything is really important.
That's a good point.
Yeah. You go to a natural area, you go to a park, state park, national park, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of plants, and animals. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's really cool. You have anything else?
I'm just digesting everything.
Yeah, I know.
Do you want to go into the clinically pressed ones, the final questions?
Sure.
If
you're ready.
We're hitting right around an hour, so.
Yep, good.
The first one we have, and it's very general, but something that I think we probably covered it in this talk, but something that you believe in that others may not.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
But I'll go with the one category, which we haven't talked about, and
Okay.
that is about our attitude and our mental state. And that is the most important aspect of health for people. It's the most important thing, is what your mental attitude is, what your state, your anxiety level or satisfaction level, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
That the mind-body connection is so strong in people. It is so strong that we, I really believe, and a lot of people aren't going to believe this, that illnesses are sometimes warnings to us to slow down or to change or to do something. And so I think, that whole mind connection, I think that's something we need to appreciate and think about. And so if our life has a lot of stress in it or something, we got to take care of that. Because if you don't address that, you're going to get sick. You can eat, you can exercise, everything else, but if you're not happy, if you're not at peace with things, then you're gonna have trouble. Yeah.
That's great advice. So what are your tips for kind of having that?
The biggest thing, which one of the questions at the end here is about a book. We'll talk about a couple books, but people think too much, and so we got to shut off our brain. Which is, kind of counterintuitive because we think we're so smart, and we can figure everything out.
Yeah.
But we overthink things too much.
And constant chatter that's always
there. Yeah, that's exactly it. That chatter, and so.
Plus, not your Twitter feed to always have something.
Oh, and you're so distracted.
I don't watch the news anymore. or read newspapers just because it's always depressing.
Yeah,
What do you need in
yeah,
some of that stuff in your life?
yeah. Well, and we spend so much time in the past and in the future, and we're only here right now.
Right.
True.
This is it. So don't waste your time beating yourself up for something that happened in the past,
Right.
and don't waste your time worrying about something in the future because it ain't here yet.
Yeah.
Now that's easy to say because we've got
Right.
you had to get here this morning. We had
sure.
to get up. We got to
Yeah.
live your life. You got to follow the calendar and stuff. But don't let your mind run away with you.
Yeah, don't let it consume you.
Whatever you're doing, be there and do it.
For sure.
That's a big part of it. Yeah, that presence.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough.
That
Tough,
goes.
but it is great
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah,
Just curious, is one of the books The Power of Now?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's probably my top recommendation for a book, actually. Yeah.
And you know what?
I need to read it.
The Power of Now and also A New Earth. He's got the newer book that he made, A New Earth. So those two books by Eckhart Tolle are really good. The problem with those books is a lot of people don't get it. And so because the chatter is so strong in their mind, they can't read it. They get into it and they go, it just doesn't make any
It's
sense.
not a fast read. You kind of have to.
No, and
Going
it's
through
not
it
something
is-
you plow through the
Right.
whole thing. You can pick
Right.
it up and you can read one page anywhere, and you can go back and read it again whenever. So I actually had the tapes because I drive a lot,
Yeah.
and so the CDs. So I spend a lot of time listening to it, and I've listened to both of those books about 6 or 8 times.
Wow.
And actually when I go home today, I'll listen to it again because it's so rich. Every little conversation is so rich that you've learned new things each time.
I can totally see
Those
that.
are the best ones.
Yeah.
I remember when I was reading that. I mean, it was life changing for me because
Yes.
just being aware of that chatter, and like when I read that, it was just like it just opened my eyes. It was like,
Yep.
oh my god, like,
Yep.
wow, and it just
Yep.
hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, it was unreal. Like my entire life up until that point, it was there, and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
And then like it's just like wow, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is a life change. It is really life changing, and I would say
Right.
for me too. The last 2 years,
Yeah.
it's been the biggest change for my life too, and it really has. So one of the questions is about going back 10 years. What would you do?
Yeah, jump right into it.
And I would rely less on as far as, and I think it was directed towards lessons and learning or whatever.
Yep.
And I would rely less on traditional learning modes and really live this way, be present, and learn from whatever situation you're in. Learn from the people, because you can learn so much from people.
Mm-hmm.
And any situation is just really pay attention to what's going on around you.
Yeah.
As you can, because so much goes by. There's so many things people don't see. There's so many things that are right under our nose that we just don't get. So that whole approach, I think, that being present, I think that's a big thing. Yeah.
We were chatting about that even coming in and just looking at like how this is placed back in the bluffs and the rolling hills and just how gorgeous that is. And then I think about like when I'm sitting out at football practice, we get a view of the bluffs every day.
Yeah.
Like, how do I not just sit there at least for a little
Yeah,
bit and
exactly.
just like take that in, that is what I get to look at every day when I'm out at practice. Like
Exactly.
you just take that stuff for granted so quickly.
So that's being grateful and
Mhm.
thankfulness, and that gratefulness that actually builds into your positive mental attitude.
For sure.
Because that's a big life changer right there. When you're grateful, and when the challenges come, also accept it. Accept the situation. Now, if you can change it, if you need to move out of that situation, if there's something you can do to change the situation, have at it.
Yeah.
But if there's a situation you don't have power to change, accept it totally, and then the solutions will come. If you don't, because if you say this should not be happening, hey, it's happening.
You're resisting.
You're resisting, yeah. And so you've got to give up that resistance. Yeah.
And almost being grateful. I just finished another book that talked about being grateful for that challenge almost, and just having
Yes.
that approach of just like telling yourself the best possible story, no matter what it is. Like you're gonna have challenges no matter what, but looking at that challenge and seeing it, being grateful for it, and being like, hey, how can I turn this?
The truth and the challenge is that it's what you need at this point in time for your development. It's the challenge that you need to overcome. That's the way it works. Is that, and this came out of Tully too. Is that you have the exact challenge that you need to work through.
Yeah.
And when you see people that really irritate you, the other thing is if whatever irritates you, think about what's irritating you and think about that in yourself, because really a lot of times it's what you have inside of you that you
Yes.
don't like in the other person.
Yeah,
You're
that's a
letting
hard
it-
one.
Exactly.
That's a hard one to
Exactly.
go back to, but
Exactly, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So, to the book, you know, we talked about Tully and all that, and,
Yeah.
and some people just will have a hard time with it. And I would say what really helped me, the bridge that got me to Tully was Letting Go by David R. Hawkins.
okay.
It's called Letting Go. David R. Hawkins is a psychiatrist. He's a medical doctor that does psychology things, and it's about this acceptance. It's about forgiving yourself. It's about not hanging on to grievances. Letting go. That whole concept. And I think that if people have trouble with Power of Now, I would go to Letting Go first.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it can really be a life changer. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that one out. I haven't read that one.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in there called "Physician Heal Thyself."
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's all about how your mental state determines. And the other thing is, like if you have an illness, don't allow that label,
Right.
because that's a program. I'm a cancer patient. Well,
Yeah.
now I'm in cancer mode. I'm going to do all these things because I'm a cancer patient. I'm living that reality.
Yeah,
You
right.
don't go with those labels.
I'm talking to a lot of our athletes about that when they're so bummed out about it. It's like, if you're gonna have a crappy attitude, this is gonna last for weeks. If you think
Yeah.
about your body healing itself and this is
Yes.
just something to get stronger,
Yes.
I've seen kids turn around faster than you ever would have thought, but they've got to stay positive about it, or else it's just going to consume them, and then you're going to be hurt for the rest of your career.
That's exactly right.
You can overcome so many things. So.
And the other thing is listening to your body. So if you are hurt,
Right.
you don't push through that pain if it's really
Yeah.
if the body has that for a reason to protect itself.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think the last one that we haven't really covered is the most influential or most bang for your buck fitness nutrition health purchase for
Yeah, I kind of struggle with that because I'm not a gadget type guy too much, but I did settle on my Merrill hiking shoes.
Okay.
Nice.
Nice.
They are the most comfortable shoes that I've ever had. I've been wearing them for about 5 or 6 years now. That's like the second or third pair, but
Sure.
I just, as much as I can wear those tennis shoes in pretty much every situation, it's amazing. And walking more because of that. I think
definitely.
I travel a lot, so there's a lot of sitting in planes or sitting in cars or whatever. But park the car a little further away.
Yep.
Use the stairs in the hotel.
Yep.
Even if you're on the 4th floor, it makes a huge difference.
Are
But
they pretty durable too?
yeah.
My son had a pair of Merrells
Yeah.
and they lasted. He hard on shoes.
Yeah. These ones here are probably 5 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah. Now I've got a second pair I'm breaking in because these aren't really good enough to wear. They're kind of getting to where they don't look that great.
Oh, okay.
So I got a nicer pair but they're not as comfortable as this pair.
Sure.
They tend, they fit your foot after a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. But
It's hard to put a price on a good pair of footwear though.
Oh,
Something that
it's
fits you well
amazing. I've never seen a shoe so comfortable. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Good deal.
Well,
Anything
then-
else you want to hit or cover?
I think we've hit it all, guys.
Yeah, really, yeah.
I think there's a lot of good stuff here, and boy, we don't know all the answers, but just stay open to what you're doing and where you're at, and and be there,
For sure.
and it'll work. Yeah.
All right.
In closing, if people want to find out more about you or stuff you're doing or within Organic Valley, what would be the
Yeah,
best
I would
resources
say,
we can
the
link to?
Organic Valley website is probably a good place to start.
Okay.
There's all kinds of consumer information there, and so if you want to learn more about the products, about how they're, we've got a lot of this information we went over about the healthiness and different things, but the website, if somebody wanted to get a hold of me, that'd probably be the best way too, is
Okay.
just this consumer, there's a hotline number, that's an
Okay.
800 number on the website, and if they just leave a message and say they want to get a hold of Dr. Guy, I'll get back with you. Leave me a phone number or an email, and I'll correspond back. But yeah,
Sounds
it'd be
good.
great. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're
you,
welcome.
Zach.
Thanks for
Good
coming
times.
today.
Yeah,
Thanks for
absolutely.
coming. It's really good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was
You're welcome.
awesome. In every
Yeah.
sense of the word.